Hello again and very welcome to the chapter about the back rank. This is one of the most basic motifs. We learn about it already when we start with chess, when we're taking our first steps, because we have the famous back rank mate on the first rank or on the 8th rank, which definitely all of us has experienced at some point. I would say there are three different situations where the back rank becomes very important. In the first case, it's simply about giving mate. In the second case, once a rook or a queen reaches the 8th rank, the first rank, so to speak, there can be material losses, right? Some piece can fall off, some kind of fork along the back rank. And the third case is when a heavy piece, a rook for example, reaches the 8th rank and manages to paralyze the opponent's pieces. For example, if black lands a rook on d1, giving check at the king on g1, maybe there is a knight on b1 and a rook on a1, and in this way the rook on d1 is able to kind of paralyze white's queenside pieces. So this is important to take into account. I would say that mainly the back rank motif, it's used by the stronger side. It's used in attacking situations and so on. But it's also very important to exploit this motif when we are defending. So that's what this chapter is about, how we can exploit the motif of the back rank when we're having some kind of difficulty on the board. So let's start with our first example here. We are playing with the black pieces. You can see that it's an endgame. White is a pawn up. You would think that white is more active here, right? If you look at the pieces, their pieces are like in more active places, especially the rook on the 7th rank. At the same time, whenever we have this kind of situation with the king on g1 and 3 pawns next to it, this means that we have a back rank motif. And it's interesting that this position, which appears as if it was a fighting position, it's actually completely winning for black. They just have to make good use of the back rank motif. So what do you think black played here? Of course, they noticed this motif. The knight can actually not move due to the mate on d1. This means that the knight doesn't work like a normal knight, and for that reason black found a very pretty move, rook b8. Fantastic move, you would say, some kind of invisible move that we usually don't take into account because we see that the knight is controlling that square, but as you can see here, the point is that black is about to deliver mate on the back rank. Unfortunately for white, by the way, in this game we have with the white pieces Sorokin and playing black Paravian. Unfortunately, white cannot escape this situation in any good way. You can see that, for example, taking, of course, that's the mate that we're talking about. If we play something like rook takes b8, black would just take back, and in this case, again, the knight is doomed because it cannot move due to the mate on the back rank. So there is nothing white can do here really after this very pretty move, rook b8. They actually played like this in the game. Yeah, they took on b8, and after bishop takes b8, g4, desperate measure in order to help the king out, but of course black took on d7 and they went on to win this endgame with a piece up. So simple example, yet very important to see that white should have considered this before. I'm not exactly sure what happened in the previous moves here, but it's safe to say that a move like king f1 or perhaps a move like g3 would have led to a completely different picture here. So very nice motive, rook ab8, surprising move, but very strong. Maybe we should also have a look at what happens if white tries to keep a rook on b7. They could try the move rook b6, right? Rook cb6. However, in this case, we have another funny tactical situation. Aha, you're right. Actually, there is something going on the b file also. So black could take on d7, again toying with the back rank motif, and if white takes on d7, we take the rook, and again, black is a piece up. So this simple example just to get to know, to get into the right mood, so to speak, as for the back rank motif. Winning move, rook ab8, very pretty, and quite easy to miss such details when we're sitting there at the board. So let's continue. Let's take our next example. We can see that white has sacrificed a piece in order to open up black's kingside. The queen is in a very dangerous place. You can see that this pawn is being attacked, and if that pawn is taken, perhaps the bishop will also wake up. So black has to find a way here to safeguard their kingside. Perhaps the first move that you would consider is something like rook e8, defending the pawn with a rook. This is possible, but it would give white some chances for an attack, or to continue their attack. A good move would be f4, trying to deflect the black knight from the g6 square. And black would still have some difficulties in this position. But if we now move away our vision from the black king side, so to speak, if we look a little further up on the board, we can see that there is actually a back rank motive. White has a king on g1. They have exactly like in the previous example, the 3 pawns in front of it, which means that, for example, if this rook leaves the first rank, there might be something going on the back rank. So that's what black noticed here in this game between Antal with white pieces and Lo Zhen playing black. They played here the very pretty move queen f7. I mean, this is the kind of move that black wanted to play, of course, bringing the queen a little closer to the king side and try to trade queens perhaps. But you would say, what happens now if white takes the knight? What if they take this knight on e5? And this is what black had prepared, of course, because now you will see that suddenly after rook a1 check, white needs to put the bishop on c1, which means that there are some dependencies in this position. Now the queen has to keep track of the bishop on c1. So how do you think black took advantage of this situation? How can they exploit the fact that white's queen is tied to the defense of the bishop? That's right. Nice move. It could have been very strong for other reasons in other situations to move queen f6, trying to trade queens. But here we're not talking about trading queens. We're talking about winning material. White suddenly cannot keep everything defended anymore. We have 3 threats here, you could say. Rook takes c1, we have that in the pocket. So white cannot defend properly here in any way. For example, if they go back with the rook, we could then take on h6, and we have the pin here in the very end. So very nice solution by black here. There are other moves that they can play, but I would say this is by far the most practical choice. Queen f7, relying on the back rank motive, you could say. If rook takes e5, we have rook a1, forcing them to play bishop c1. Just imagine that white had played h3 earlier, and they could play king h2 now. That would be a completely different story, but they haven't. So this is almost like, you could say, philosophical issue. You would say, if everybody knows that the back rank motive exists, why don't they play h3 or g3 or whatever as soon as possible? Well, there are other things that we have to do in our games, right? We don't have time to, in every game, automatically play a move like that. That would be just a beginner's advice, to always keep some extra space for your king. And also the very move that we use to give some space for the king. We will talk about this topic later, by the way, in the chapter about making space. Also, that can be a delicate issue. Should we push the h pawn, or should we push the g pawn, and so on? So there is no simple solution. Sometimes, I mean, every tempo counts, and we have other things that we would like to do on the board. So it's not that simple. Very often this motive comes up in the tactical battle, the back rank motive, simply because players, they have other priorities than giving some extra space to their king. So very nice move, queen f7. We should also notice that f4 wouldn't make sense here anymore, because now we're protecting these squares. So black would simply play knight g4, and just for the record, if white takes on e6, we actually again have the back rank motive here, right? We would take, and we would deliver mate. So not necessarily, of course, we have to have the 3 pawns in front. It depends on what happens with these squares. In this case, black is controlling the square on f2. Nice way of exploiting the back rank motive. Let's continue. I actually have one of my own games here. It's a game I played some years ago against a student. I played here at this point bishop g5. This is my last move. I'm playing with the white pieces. My student, Daniuska, playing black, has to do something about the tension on the f file. You can see that black cannot take the bishop. In that case, it's immediately mate here, queen f7 check, and we mate on h7. So which other solution could be considered? It would be nice to play rook f8, of course. You could say that knight e6 would not make sense, because black would in that case take on g5, and there is also a threat against the white queen. Unfortunately for black, after rook f8, white has a very nice double attack, queen h4, attacking the pawn on h7 and also attacking the bishop on f6. So that's another bad choice for black. In the game, I opponent unfortunately played bishop g7, which allowed me to play queen f7 check and later on take the pawn on g6. So this was not a good idea. You can see that white has many pieces in the attack. Not surprisingly, it's a difficult situation for black. The game concluded knight f8 and I sacrificed on f8 in order to remove the guard of the h7 pawn. Bishop takes, bishop check, and bishop g7 that is made on h7. Alright, so many bad options. What to do then? Well, if you look very carefully, because we're only talking right now about the black king, right? We are basically restricting ourselves to this part of the board. If we look a little further away, we look at the whole board, we will see that there is indeed some kind of back rank motif that black could use at some point, hopefully. So how would that happen? Well, for that to happen, the white queen and rook would have to leave their current places. They cannot control this square for the back rank motif to make sense. So how could that happen? You're right. We can play a retreating move. I would say those moves are generally difficult for humans. Retreating our pieces, it's not natural for most of us, I think. You got it, of course. Queen d8. Very nice move. In this way, black gets ready to recapture on f6 twice, and if white takes the third time, they are duly getting mated on e1. For instance, bishop takes f6, we take back. We should take back with the queen, because if we take back with the knight, white would still have pressure on the f file. So it's better to play here after bishop takes f6. Queen takes f6, insisting with the trade of queens. And white can, of course, say no. They can say, well, we don't want to trade queens. We want to play something like queen g1. But then also black can move their queen somewhere, and they would be reasonably safe. The key variation here, of course, is if queen takes f6, black will take back on f6, and white cannot take on f6. Then we are using the back rank motif to our favor here with rook e1. So for that reason, white will have to play something else, like, for example, king g1. And in this case, they don't have to worry about this anymore, but we gain the tempo, and we could simply secure this knight with king g7. It's nice that white cannot put a rook on f3 at this point, because the bishop is there. So I would say a rather simple example, yet not that evident when you're sitting there at the board. For most people, probably moves like rook f8 are more natural, but this is the way that we have to play queen d8, relying on the back rank motif if white takes on f6. Okay, let's have a look at something from the opening. This is actually a theoretical position from the Queen's Gambit accepted. You can see that there is a big tactical issue here for black. There is a pin on the d file, and we cannot really defend that bishop in any natural way. So evidently we will have to look for some kind of tactical solution here, some kind of unexpected resource. If we look very carefully, we look beyond the pin on the d file, we can again consider that white's king is exposed to a back rank motif, because the bishop has not left the board. I mean, it hasn't left c1 yet, so the white rook on a1 is not controlling the first rank. So for that reason, it's time to look for some way of exploiting this back rank motif. Well, I would say that if you don't know this position, it's not that simple, but it's part of opening theory. So I'm pretty sure that in this game, Gorstein with white and the Grigorian Karen with the black pieces, I'm pretty sure that Grigorian knew this in advance, what to do here. That's right. For the back rank motif to work, we have to somehow get another piece to the d file. We have to control this square, and that can be done with the bishop. So the right move here, bishop g4. Very unexpected and very strong. Let's see if we understand this. If white takes on d8, of course we take on e2, and it's material equality. Black has nothing to worry about. They're even a little better here thanks to the bishop pair in an open pawn structure. On the other hand, if white plays queen c4, which is what they played in the game, again, it appears that black is in trouble here, right? Because the queen is still under an attack, and there are two pieces attacking the bishop on g4. However, here comes, you could say, another key move in this example. Black can actually give away the queen temporarily here. Queen takes d5. Very surprising and very strong. After queen takes d5, rook a d8 with that rook, of course, so that the other rook keeps protecting f7. white in normal circumstances would be able to take on d8 and then take on g4. But here they cannot do that because, as you can see in that case, they would get mated, right? So they will have to do something else. Some games, I think this is a very theoretical position, so there were some games, I think, where they played like this: queen takes d8, rook takes d8, bishop e3 in order to avoid a mate. And black quickly played here rook d1 check. After rook takes d1, bishop takes d1. Draw is not an unlikely result, but I would say black is the one who is pressing here thanks to the bishop pair. So in the game, instead, the Gorstein played queen b3. And black's move is evident, of course. It's time to play rook d1, getting back the material at once. White is forced to take back, queen takes, bishop takes. And here, white played a very good move. We're talking about the bishop pair, and there is a way in which white can actually eliminate black's bishop pair. What would that be? Aha, you're right. Sorry, bishop d5, clever move, trading off one pair of bishops, so that after bishop takes d5, rook takes d1, we have a different kind of situation. Bishop versus knight. Black played here rook c8, and the game was later drawn. Still, I would prefer black here, but white is fairly active, so the draw is the most likely result here. So this has been seen many times, this variation, but I still find it's rather interesting how we can actually carry out two sacrificial moves in a row and get away with it in this way. Bishop g4, white has to play something which protects the rook, probably like queen c4, queen b5, and so on, and then we actually sacrifice and we bring the rook, and we are relying on this. So again, you could say, of course, but hey, why didn't white play a move like h3 before? Well, in that case, they probably wouldn't have ended up like this with a rook on d5 and so on. They would have lost time for other activities, for other things that they were doing on the board. So there is a logical explanation for this also. So interesting. There are several cases in the opening of usage of the back rank in this case, in this kind of situation. So it's good to keep this in mind whenever there are open files in the center and so on. Let's take something from the endgame instead, where of course this also comes up, even if there are perhaps not so many pawns left on the second rank, it can still be an issue. Let's see here a game between Sargsyan with the white pieces and Holm playing black. So this is, I would say, a position more related to positional defense. Our king is definitely not in trouble here. However, our position as a whole is probably inferior because, as you can see here, we have a knight versus bishop battle, and this kind of pawn structure favors the bishop, especially since our pawns are fixed on the color of their bishop. So this is unpleasant for black. This can be a long afternoon at the board for black. Difficult defense. In the game, Holm unfortunately played the standard move here, knight f6, the most obvious reply, you could say knight f6, keeping track of the pawn on d5. Yeah, white can probably not take that pawn in that case. There will be some scenario with the pin on the d file. However, the problem here is that white is better long term, which is why black should look for a more drastic solution. In the game, white played bishop f3, later on put the king on g2, and they started some pressure on the whole board. I think it was something like this: queen d7, king g2, so that queen h3 cannot be played. Rook c8, after rook takes c8, queen takes c8, white played g4, good move in the endgame, trying to take more space, and white later prevailed. Very unpleasant that we have these weaknesses until the very end in this endgame. So this is something to avoid. Another move that you could consider here is the move knight d2. I have used this position as an exercise, and some of my students have been saying this move because it's very, what could you say, tempting, because we are threatening now to play queen e1. Unfortunately, white has a nice rejoinder here, a nice reply. What do you think white would play? How would white neutralize black's threat? That's right. We will come to this in the next chapter. No, in chapter 5, I think we will talk about this obstruction. We are obstructing now black on the e file. Queen e3, that's a really nice move because now black cannot really get to the e file with the queen, and if they take, obviously you can see that black's knight is in a very bad place, and the endgame as such is very favorable for white. So knight e2, nice move, but unfortunately not completely correct due to this move, queen e3. But now we're definitely getting closer. We have seen that if we move the knight, there will be tactical possibilities connected to this move, queen e1. And that's what explains black's best move here. So what do you think? Which would be the best way to enable this move? Queen e1, the best way to enable this idea of seizing the first rank with the queen? Aha. The knight can go to many places, but definitely this is a nice square, g5. Because in this way, as you can see, we are creating the concrete threat of queen e1 followed by knight f3. That's a fork on f3, so this puts some pressure on white. I think the best move here would be queen e3, the same move that we were talking about. White would be really happy about trading queens. Of course, we should have a look at the most principled reply here. If white takes on d5 with the bishop, this at first sight appears as if it's going to work, because if we play this intended idea of attacking along the first rank, queen e1 check, king g2, queen d1, this looks very promising. But if you look a little further, you will see that white could play rook c7, and if we go rook e1 trying to mate them, there is a way for white to safeguard their king, to save their king. How do you think white could help the king? Is it possible that some other piece could vacate a square for the king? Exactly, we can use the pawn for that purpose. We will talk about that in the chapter about making space, by the way. Not this pawn, of course, then we're getting mated, but we can use the other pawn, the h pawn. Very nice. This is what I call the dragon bishop, the bishop on d5. Okay, the dragon is with black, but here I'm looking at it from white's perspective. You can see that it's keeping control of all these squares, so it's impossible for black to get at white's king. So that would be false trail for black after bishop takes d5. But there is a much nicer move for black. So let's speak a little about flexibility in the attack. Some of the best moves when we are on the attack are the ones that keep several options open. And that's what black's best move achieves here. You're right, we can put our queen on d7. Innocent looking move, but extremely strong, because we have at least two big threats here. One, we have the fork on f3, now that there is a pin on the d file. And two, we have the idea of checking on e1, and after king g2, we could then deliver mate on h3. So this would be very bad for white. And this explains why after knight g5, white should rather resort to this move queen e3 in order to prevent the arrival of black's queen to e1, the idea that we were talking about. Black, in this situation, definitely they should keep the queens on. There are at least two reasons why queens should stay on the board. One is that the endgame is good for white. You can see that if queen takes e3, pawn takes, rook takes, bishop takes d5, this would be nightmare for black. We don't even need to count the pawns here. We can simply see that the queen side is a big trouble area for them. And the other reason why we should not trade queens, of course, is that we're playing for an attack. Our king is safer than white's king. So for that reason, queen d7 is called for here. We are trying to bring our queen a little closer to the king side, perhaps to f5 or g4. White could play something like queen d2. Sorry, and at this point, a good move would be queen f5. In this way, we are getting ready for either knight f3 or knight h3, and at the same time, you can see that we're also targeting the pawn on d3. This would be a clearly fightable position. Both sides could win this game. It's not like in the game where white was pressing. There were only two results, you could say, the way the game went. Here, anything is possible. So interesting case. We never really got to use the back rank, but it was always there present in the calculations. If we go back to the very beginning, we can see that instead of routinely retreating the knight to f6, it was actually smarter to go for these tactical complications, try to create counterplay connected to queen e1. After queen e3, queen d7 would be a good move to bring the queen a little closer to the king side. All right, now I would like to show you one of my most interesting games, I would say, in this area about the back rank. It was played a long time ago. I was playing a tournament in Argentina, and I played one of the best players in Argentina, Rubén Felgaer. I was playing with the black pieces, and honestly, things didn't go very well. I played a Sicilian with black. Sorry, and the fact that I'm castled long is probably a bad sign. Usually in this opening it's better to castle short. But anyway, the game got very complex. Right now white is a pawn up, but I have some activity. You can see that my knight is rather strong on c5, and at the same time there is something going on the g file. And of course, you will immediately notice this. We have the situation with the king shielded by 3 pawns on their initial squares, which means that definitely there will be a back rank motif in the error. At the same time, please don't forget that whenever one side uses rook lifts like this, that automatically also means that their back rank defense will be a little affected. So time to see here how to continue with the black pieces, because in the long run this would be a difficult position. You can see that the pawn is looming forward. Rook takes g2. Obviously my opponent had prepared to take on h8. This was his idea. I think he put his queen recently on c3 for that purpose. So I was looking for something else here. One move that I was checking was knight a4, tactical move, trying to attack the pawn on b2. In the game, I only saw that if queen d2, I had some idea of, if you see what I mean, I would like to take on g2, but I don't like to lose my rook on h8. So I had some idea like queen takes b2, something like this, hoping to get into an endgame to take his bishop next turn. Unfortunately, my knight is in a bad place here on b2. White could try to safeguard the bishop and at the same time try to trap the knight. How could that be done? You're right. Bishop f1. We are now controlling this square. My only square for the knight would be this one. And here you could use what I call the magic distance. You could put the piece on a square where it's located 2 squares away from a knight, diagonally speaking, of course, rook f3, and in this way white will be very close to taking that knight on d1. So this should be avoided. However, looking at this game many years later, the computer told me that actually after knight a4, queen d4, I could play this move. This is in fact the move I played in the game, rook h5. I didn't see this at all in this version, but the computer is saying that after rook takes h5, it's funny now because now you can see the queen is attacked. But the back rank motif, it's more, what can I say? It has a higher importance than anything else. They have no time to take the queen because they get mated, right? Strange variation, queen takes d6. Sorry, I think I lost my way here in the variations. Give me just one moment. Rook takes h5 first. Oh, I thought I could actually take here. Interesting. So I can't do that. Let's think about this for a short while. What would white play in that case? Yeah, actually I can't see exactly what would be the reason here. Maybe we can take on d6, and in that case black's king is in danger. But also, yeah, white is right now the exchange up, but they're getting mated. Yeah, this is a very confusing position, I must say. Maybe we can just come back. I think that's the reason, right? We can just come back, and if they go back, maybe we can start an attack also. If this is confusing for you, there are 2 of us. I'm also a bit confused by this. But it looks like if black is in trouble here, actually. And I think also in the very worst case, perhaps we could just go home with the rook again. So yeah, that was not the variation that I wanted to show you. I was telling you about in this position, this was the plan I had, knight a4, and then to take on b2, but the computer said that you could take on h5 first. I think I had discarded this because I didn't like rook takes h5, and after queen takes h5, queen d6. Yeah, the variation we just looked at was this crazy move, rook takes g2, but okay, let's stick to this variation instead, queen takes h5. Yeah, I think I now remember this. Yeah, I didn't like this because I couldn't see how it was going to work if white takes and then takes on a4. I couldn't see how this would work out for black, but you can see that, of course. We're talking the back rank mate. It seems as if white is controlling all the squares here. However, we can use both these 2 pieces to deliver mate. This is typical tactical motif. You can find it in combination books and so on in different versions. Exactly. We can play here queen h1. Very pretty. So that if bishop takes, we are mating them with rook g1. So I didn't see this at the game. I saw something simpler, but you could say based on the same idea. I played rook takes h5 straight away, giving away the exchange in order to seize the initiative. My opponent, after taking back on h5, I took on g2, and he now had to play queen e1 in order to take care of the first rank. Okay, he could have played other moves also. I'm checking my notes here. Rook h8 is what I analyzed some 15 years ago. King c7, and here black would still have interesting compensation. You can see that, of course, we have the mating threats, and also at some point we might be able to attack this pawn on e4. So this would not be completely clear. In the game, he chose to play instead queen e1. And here, black has different moves that they can consider, but I think there is one move which is nicer than the rest. And if we talk about this from a general perspective, the queen needs to take care of the g1 square, which means that it can be deflected. So how do you think we could deflect the white queen? Aha, interesting move, queen b4. Not so much for trading queens, but in order to deflect white's queen. I think that I cannot do it in this way, because then probably white could give check, and then they could take over here, right? That's probably a difficulty for black. So for that reason, although I'm not completely sure, yeah, or maybe you can take with the rook also. Tricky position, but I think this was stronger still, the one that we're looking at, queen e1 and queen b4, because we're also attacking the pawn on e4. My opponent played rook h8, check. Now I have to see which side to go with the king. I can't go this way, I think, because rook takes a5 is very strong, or at least it seems like. Yeah, these positions are very, very tricky. You can see that black shouldn't resign here. They could play knight a6, and all the time we have this motif with rook g1. So what would happen here? I'm not completely sure, actually, what would be the best move. Maybe white should stay away from this pawn. Maybe we shouldn't take that pawn. At least I cannot see clearly how white should continue here. Or maybe you could just go home with the rook. Yeah, that's probably a possibility, right? 1, 2, 3. Yeah, white would keep the extra exchange, so this should be good for white. I hope I haven't missed any big tactical detail here. So let's see what happened in the game. Rook h8, I played king c7 instead. So that seems smarter, right? Because now they cannot take with check, and the queen is hanging. My opponent played rook c3. It appears as if he has everything under control, but we already know the story. The queen is a slave, you could say, to the mating motif on the first rank, so we can try to deflect her. Queen takes e4. Would be a blunder if it wasn't for the same motif, no, with rook g1. So difficult for white, and I can definitely understand my opponent in move 35. He's losing a little control of this position. The best way to play here was rook e3, and I can go back to b4, and he will play queen f1. Yeah, interesting variation. I could play something like queen g4, and safe to say black has their share of the chances here. A lot of activity, and also just a minimal material disadvantage. I think white would have to play something like rook h1 perhaps. But okay, I'm happy to play black in this position. We have a lot of activity, and I like this knight on c5. But look what happened in the game. Instead, he played here in time trouble queen f1. So this gives me a very nice tactical possibility. By the way, I should also mention to you that if rook takes e5, this is not dangerous for black. It looks a little dangerous, but nothing's really going on here. I can play b6, and I can then control. I can play queen d7 if I'm being checked on a7. But okay, back to the game. He played here the move queen f1. So what do you think? Do we have any spicy move here with black? Any way of taking advantage of white's dependency on the first rank? That's right. I still remember the pleasure carrying out this move queen e2. Very pretty move, even if it doesn't win the game. It's a very nice move. We are using both our pieces for deflective means, and both of them are ready to give mate on the first rank if possible. Felgaer played queen c1. Evidently he could not take either of these pieces, then it would be mate, right? So he has to keep the queen on the first rank. He played queen c1, and I took this pawn. By now you can see that even material is in black's favor, and also activity is great. He had to play here to prevent rook f1. He had to play rook h1, and I simply went back with the king. So yeah, you can see how the game changed, no? How the position changed from the beginning. Now black is definitely in the driver's seat, but all right, in the rest of the game I didn't play that well, and it was a draw in the end. But yeah, good example of how you can use the back rank motif for counterplay in difficult positions. It was possible, of course, to play something more passive here, but I took my chance and gave away the exchange in order to start some counterattacks on the first rank, on the back rank. So let's continue. We talked about the fact that sometimes the arrival of the heavy piece to the first rank or the 8th rank doesn't necessarily mean that there is mate coming up. It can also be connected to material gains. And that's what we have in the next example here. In this game between Rasmussen and Corley, White has just played the move g4. Very brave move. You can see that what White is going to do here, if they have a chance, is to play g5, trying to open up the game for their attack. Don't forget that the bishop is also ready to attack if the h-file is cleared. So what to do with black? We look a little at black's king, but we should also look at white's king, of course. And you can see that even if there are only 2 pawns in front of the king, we have something here also. The bishop on b7 is controlling the g2 square in some variations, which means that there is definitely a back rank motive to take into account. So how could black exploit the situation? Well, there are at least 2 ways in which they can do it. One interesting move that I looked at was if you take this pawn on d4. Looks crazy to play this, but there is a tactical explanation. White cannot take with the queen. In that case, we would play rook d8. Now it looks a little like that other example that we looked at, Gorstein Grigorian, the one with the queen's gambit accepted with motives on the d file. You can see that here after queen a4, white would lose material. Black would simply take on f3, and they would be a piece up. No, not a piece up, a pawn up, but that's enough. No, a nice advantage for black, and you can see that there are things going on here on the first rank. Definitely, again, we have this situation with the rook lift. White carried out the rook lift, and that means that their defenses of the back rank are weakened. So knight takes d4 was interesting, because if knight takes d4, black would then play rook d8, right? Rook f d8, I think. And in this way, it's not so easy for white to untangle. You can see that there is the immediate threat of rook takes, queen takes, rook takes, and rook c1 mate. So interesting, because we also have e5 in the pocket here. But what Corley played in the game was way simpler. He played bishop takes f3. What's the point? Why do we let white take back on f3 and pin our knight? It turns out that after queen takes d4, we have the same situation again, that if white takes twice on d4, there will be a tactical issue with rook c1. So this is how he played. Very clever idea. If queen takes d4, knight takes d4, rook takes d4, indeed we will have rook c1, and we get back the piece, and we have an extra pawn in that endgame. So in the game, white played instead the bishop takes f5. Yeah, this was a clever choice, because the bishop was about to get lost anyway. By the way, if you take with the pawn, it's exactly the same situation. We would take on d2 and then again bring our rook to the last rank in order to get back the sacrificed piece. So in the game, after queen takes d4, white took on f5, and now it all evaporates into an equal endgame. Black took on d2 after rook takes, g takes f5, rook takes f5, rook ft8, rook e2. The players agreed to a draw here. So nice usage of this motive, back rank motive. Black smell that there is something going on here. There is something coming up on the first rank. How to use it? Well, we should take first, and then we're ready to take on d4, because somehow white's rook on d1 is overloaded to 2 different defensive tasks here, so to speak. Nice, let's continue. We have only one example left, and I wanted to show you in this last example that the back rank motive, it can appear in even the most, what can I say, calm positions where you would not expect this motive to happen. So this is what we have in our last example with the white pieces. Beliavsky, and playing black is Leitner. You can see that white has a more active position. They have more space. They have managed to bring a knight to f5, which is, in a way, it's nice to have that knight there, but on the other hand, you can also see that there is some kind of tension on this diagonal, so white should be careful here. So what does this have to do with the back rank motive, you might say? Well, we need a little imagination to be able to do something related to the back rank motive. For starters, we would need to dislodge white's rook. We would need to deflect it from from the first rank. And that is what explains black's best move here. Aha, we can play here the move, unexpected move c5. Looks ugly because now white gets a passed pawn with d5, but there are tactical merits of this move. By the way, in the game, Leitner instead played b5, which is another very interesting move, and I think he actually won the game in the end. Yeah, this was an underdog win, you could say, against strong Grandmaster Beliavsky. But probably the best move, b5 is very interesting. White, after a takes b5, c takes b5. There was some tactical issue with this knight, but later analysis showed that knight d5 would have been very strong here for white. So the right move here probably c5. What's the point? Well, that after d5, we can now, in similar fashion to the other game, the previous game, Corley's combination, we can play here the move knight d4, because white's rook is overloaded to two different defensive functions. So after knight takes d4, c takes d4, white would be in big trouble. You can see that if they take on d4, you don't think twice about your next move, of course. Rook e1. If the king goes up, there will be issues with knight g4, I think. And if they instead play bishop f1, you can, of course, guess black's next move here, right? Of course, we're going for the attack, bishop h3. They still don't lose material, they can play rook d1, but as you can see, there is a price for all this. Suddenly there is a weak pawn in white's camp. The pawn on c4 can be attacked, so black could simply take on f1, and after rook takes f1, bishop takes f1, king takes f1, black would take on c4, and white's position collapses completely here after knight takes d5 next turn. So white cannot play like this. After the move c5, they would have to be a little pragmatic and forget about that passed pawn. They would have to play d takes e5 instead. It's a concession, but it's what they have to play. Black would take with the knight probably to open up some space for their pieces, and white could perhaps consider this move knight e3 in order to bring a knight to d5. Possibly resuming the idea of creating a passed pawn. This would be white's best choice, but black would be okay here also. Bishop c6 is just one idea to try to trade off the bishop on g2, or perhaps trade off a knight on d5. So this is what could have happened after c5 if white reacts in a more pragmatic way. If they go all in d5, they will taste this move knight d4. Very clever move, exploiting white's weakness along the first rank. So that's what I wanted to show you in this example. The bottom line is that in this chapter, the bottom line is to always keep this back rank motif present. You can see that even if it's not about mate, it can be about material gains, such as in this case. If we do a quick recap here in our first example, let's see here. In our first example, we saw how black won the game instantly. Despite being a pawn down in an endgame, they found this killer move rook b8. White had no chance at all of avoiding tactical losses here due to the back rank motif. In the second example, we saw how black used the same kind of thinking in order to refute white's attack. They played this clever move queen f7. It was not the only move, but it was the most practical choice, you could say, because after rook takes e5, the calculation is minimal here. Rook a1 check, and after bishop c1, the key move here queen f6, which means that white is definitely overloaded. The key variation being queen takes f6, rook takes e1 with mate. In the next example, we saw that my opponent could have played queen d8 in order to indirectly secure the bishop on f6, because I could not take there 3 times in a row, because in that case I would get mated on the back rank, so I would have to play something else, which means that black is definitely safe here. We saw in the opening example that black could use this funny tactics, bishop g4, very unexpected if you see this for the first time, queen c4, queen takes d5, and rook d8. Interesting way of exploiting white's weak back rank. We had a look at the endgame example where black had some difficulties in the long run, but by means of this very nice move, nice move knight g5, they were able to cook up some counterplay based on white's weak first rank. They are probably regretting the move rook c2, you could say. Then we had a look at my other game, this Sicilian battle, which, wow, I still remember it was a very tough battle. and I was happy to make a draw, even if perhaps I was winning in the end, but never mind. That's not important here. The important thing here is that we understand the idea of exploiting the opponent's back rank by rook takes and rook takes g2. The chess engine might not be 100% convinced by this, but you can of course imagine in a practical situation this is tough for white. We have these ideas coming up here for the sake of counterplay. We saw in the game between Rasmussen and Corley that sometimes we can use this idea not so much for mating ideas, but for material gains. The bishop on b1 is a little loose, which is what motivated black to take and then take on d4, because if white takes twice, well, then we have again rook c1 coming up. And in the last example, we saw that even in this position where you would think that the back rank motif was not around, it indeed is around if we play in this nice way with c5 and d5 followed by knight d4. This would be very unpleasant for white because we have something going on here on the e file if white takes twice on d4. All right, thank you very much and see you in the next chapter.